Ladies and gentlemen and fellow citizens, today I would like to talk about the financial sector cleanup because the Bank of Ghana's governor and the appointed receiver in respect of the savings and loans microfinance institutions, Mr. Eric Nananipa, they have been talking, and there is a figure that they keep putting up in the public domain. And I'm concerned about that figure, and every citizen of the Republic must be concerned. The governor of the Bank of Ghana and his boss, the finance minister, Mr. Kenneth Oriata, and sometimes the president, keep throwing out figures without a breakdown. When this whole financial sector cleanup started, the president and the minister of finance said it was going to cost Ghana 21 billion. And political party campaigners have used it to say that government has incurred a debt of 21 billion. Last week, the governor, when he was speaking, in fact, he was talking about assets worth 10 billion, and he had to be corrected by his deputy that it is 25 billion. Now, are they talking about cost they have incurred in terms of paying the depositors, or they are talking about expected assets that were in the books of those banks and financial institutions that they collapsed? They can't confuse the public, and me, I don't want to be confused. And stewardship demands that they clarify this position, and they can't talk to us anyhow. The governor comes and at a press conference put figures out there, accountability, 25 billion assets, blah 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 blah, and he gets up and he goes. 25 billion, is it assets or cost that they have incurred in the financial sector cleanup? So, because that question is what I want to pose today. Between the governor of the Bank of Ghana and his boss, the finance minister, they keep putting out conflicting figures. Let's even agree that the two of them are speaking about the same figure, because as and when new things come up, they add it up. So fine. Today, we are talking about 25 billion. 25 billion cedis. Is it 25 billion cedis of assets in the books of the bank that they wanted to recover, as Mr. Eric Nananipa, speaking publicly, also was talking about? Or it's cost that has been incurred by government in the financial sector cleanup, covering the banks, the savings and loans, and microfinance institutions? Now, the reason why this question is important is this. If it's about debt incurred by the government or cost incurred by the government of 25 billion cedis that has to be recovered or paid back, the question is, we should have a breakdown of those costs incurred by government, because all the financial institutions that were affected, the 9 banks, the 23 savings and loans and finance houses, and the 300 and so microfinance institutions, put together 400 and so financial institutions that had been collapsed or went through various forms of receivership and so on and so forth. The depositors' money that was at risk was 9 billion cedis. Now, how would you explain that paying 9 billion will transmogrify to 25 billion? Why would you pay 9 billion, and in the process of paying 9 billion, you pay a cost or incur a cost twice or 3 times the 9 billion? So for example, the 9 billion is a cost, which is 1, and then you have additional 25 minus 9 will give you what? So 25 minus 9 will give you some 16 billion. Why would you pay 9 billion directly to depositors and incur a cost of 16 billion? If it's the answer to my question is that the cost, the 25 billion represent a cost. Now, if the 25 billion is not a cost, but it's an estimated asset in the banks to be recovered, stated by the owners of the bank that the banks that collapsed were supposed to be recovered, as Mr. Rigananipa, the receiver, was trying to explain, then it means that this whole financial sector cleanup was not thought through properly. And as we have maintained, it was just a way to make a certain cacophony of noise, cutting a few shareholders who were perceived to be political opponents, destroy their business and so on. Because if banks, because the governor talks about assets and his boss talks about cost, and when you bring Mr. Rigananipa in, then he says that it is assets. Now, if you had assets of 25 billion to be recovered and they were in the books of the banks, why would you collapse them? Because if the banks had estimated or bloated assets of 25 billion and their total deposit liability was 9 billion, what any reasonable government would do is to, first of all, investigate and establish the existence of those assets and use it to pay the 9 billion liquidity or 9 billion liability that they had towards their depositors. Now, if you decided to collapse the banks in such a hurried manner, was it that you had an intention to lay your hands on the 25 billion worth of assets and use it for what? Was government interested to acquire the assets as stated in the books of the banks and use it for what? Or was it so that in the process some will be diverted to friends and family and so on and so forth? So we are talking about accountability the same way the governor is talking about accountability. He must be accountable to us. He has a board, but the board that sits there, they sit there as representatives of the people of Ghana. So he must be accountable to us, the people, and give us a breakdown of what he meant together with his boss, the finance minister. They can't just throw figures out there, 25 billion, 21 billion, tomorrow is 30 billion, and you are sitting there and watching them. What are they using that money for? How much of that money is going into the payment of the cost of receivership? How much is a receiver's job? And I mean, if I was Eric Nananipa, I would stay on the job for 5 years because you are paying me big dollars, and as long as I work, I don't know the kind of contract that was signed. There's no time limit. Otherwise, we should be finishing the job by now. And if I'm getting dollars per hour or per day or per month or per year or per whatever, I will tell you I'm having difficulty so that you keep paying me. So what is the total cost of this financial sector cleanup and compared to the liability of 9 billion that had to be paid? Now, let's even break down to the savings and loans that Mr. Eric Nananipa is talking about. He says that the total asset that had been stated by the savings and loans companies was 11 billion. So he's talking about assets. Now, so some way part of my question has been answered. If he's talking about assets of stated assets in the books of the bank, that's what he is chasing and tracing and looking for. Now, he said the recoverable asset was, in his estimation, 5.6 billion recoverable asset. Now, he, at the time that he was speaking, said the liability of those banks, those savings and loans companies and microfinance institutions whose stated assets was 11 billion, that he said 5.6 is recoverable, had their customers had made a claim of 6.5 billion. Now, 6.5 billion liability, and you, the auditor, international auditor, has been able to establish that the assets in the books of these banks or savings SDIs specialized deposit taking institutions, that is savings and loans and microfinance institutions, had assets, recoverable assets, to the tune of 5.6. It means that they were okay and they were above water and it's supposed to be a going concern. Why was it the need to collapse a bank or financial institutions whose assets were almost equal to their liability? So all these stories that they told us about people, the monies were not there and so on and so forth, it's all becoming a hoax. It was just to find some kind of believable pretext to collapse or go after institutions owned by people they didn't like. Because Mr. Nana Nipa would never collapse in his professional job a financial institution or any company that has a liability equal to its assets or almost at par. 5.6 billion as he claims versus 6.5 liability. Why would you collapse such a thing? As a going, because they might have even goodwill alone, you can't put value on it. And any company exists initial stages with huge liabilities, and when the returns come in, they reduce the liability and they grow in assets to overcome any liability that they have. And that is where you have what is called profit that you can distribute to the shareholders and so on and so forth as dividend. So why would anybody just be in a hurry to collapse these things? My final point, if they are minded to bring some explanation, we will respond to them and do the analysis. My next point is that, you see, the governor talks about accountability and violations of prudential norms and so on and so forth. And one of the popular or one of the trumpeted prudential norms is that the owners and shareholders of some of those financial institutions got themselves into what they call related parties transactions. And it's an interesting thing. You know, there's no saint in Jerusalem. Mr. Eric Nanipa, who has transformed as a spokesperson of government and the governor of the Bank of Ghana, works in an institution that is owned by people. I think the PwC has its headquarters in the UK and so on and so forth. So the shareholders are not in Ghana, or they may have some shareholders in Ghana. I don't know, but the shareholders, Mr. Nanipa knows that he cannot make any expenditure on behalf of that institution without the shareholders of PwC knowing about it. And he will admit to it that shareholders must know, and they scrutinize either directly or indirectly through the representatives of the board that on the board they have appointed, scrutinize the bills and expenditure of the management of that institution that they own. So as a standard, as an international person, he should know that he must give an account of, or he must, give an account of the cost of the financial sector cleanup is a necessary condition and practice in business. So since he's become a spokesperson, when he gets some of these things, then he says that, oh, as for this one, I am receiver and Bank of Ghana is different. So let me go to Bank of Ghana. So Mr. Nanipa decides to shelve his international practice when it comes to accountability to the people of Ghana by giving an excuse that he is not Bank of Ghana. Bank of Ghana also has a responsibility to give us a breakdown of the 25 billion that is cost or asset. First of all, they must establish whether it's assets or cost to government. And if it's cost to government, what is the breakdown of that cost? What is accounting for 25 billion to be a cost to be incurred when you had to pay depositors of 9 billion? So the governor cannot be talking about and expecting accountability through the court system and all those ones from and exact accountability from directors and shareholders of those banks he collapsed, when he himself is not ready to render account as to how much he's paying who, how, and when. And the convoluted figure of 25 billion that he put out. What is the breakdown? So he must also be accountable to the people of Ghana who are shareholders of the Republic of Ghana. So Mr. Nananipa is accountable to shareholders at PwC, and it's a standard in business. The same way the standard is that the governor who is seeking to get exact accountability from the shareholders and directors must also be accountable to us. Now he talks about related party and so on. My final point, Mr. Addison, Dr. Ernest Addison, in negotiating the receivership agreement with Mr. Nananipa, Mr. Nananipa's lawyer is Mr. Addison's brother, Philip Addison of MPP fame or presidential election petition fame. So at meetings that were held prior to appointment of Mr. Nananipa as receiver, he will go to meetings with his lawyers. So Mr. Addison, Philip Addison, was sitting across the table at some point with Dr. Ernest Addison, either drafting or reviewing agreement of the receivership. So today, as we speak, the brother of the governor is the one advising the receiver who got contract from the governor. And then all of them get up and talk about prudential violations, related party transactions, and so on and so forth. So please, we need to take our time and understand the essence of regulatory power and authority. It is not to use it as a bulldozer to run through the forest, destroy things, and put some figures out there. Even Parliament is sending an invitation to you to come and answer a few questions they may have in their power under the Constitution to conduct a parliamentary inquiry. You could even respond by showing up and go to tell Parliament that you are unable to answer these questions because of the fact that you are in court and so on and so forth. But you are calling the bluff of Parliament, our representative, that you won't go. The Bank of Ghana that you are sitting there as governor, is it for you or your father's property or whatever? It is for us, the people of Ghana. But here you are, this is Ghana for you. So the point is that the governor must be more open and transparent and be accountable, and he must go to Parliament to answer the questions that the MPs want him to answer. It's that simple. So let's have this debate going on, and then we'll come back at some point if the finance minister and the governor clarifies the position and they give more figures out there for us to interrogate this matter further. Thank you very much for your attention.